Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode in our Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts series. In this episode, we take a look at Perce Galea, the son of the Prince of Punters, and the mysterious circumstances around the death of Patricia Galea. In our last episode of Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts, we took a look at Perce Galea, a mild-mannered crime figure who didn't kill anyone, wasn't involved in murder, but was still one of the leading men of organised crime in the 20th century. In this episode, we take a look at his son, Perce Galea. Perce William John Galea was born in approximately 1938 and had older brother Clive, born in approximately 1936. They lived in Clovelly and Coogee, Sydney's beachside eastern suburbs, in the 1940s and 50s. They were brought up as Maltese Catholics, under the watchful eye of their father, but they didn't really lead a proper Catholic life, you would say. I'm sure quite a few commandments were broken. He grew up watching his father Perce handle things at the track, in quite a lucky family, where there was probably no shortage of cash. He would have picked up a thing or two from his old man as to how to make money. He and his brother Clive would have paid close attention to how their father kept things afloat. Their upbringing wouldn't have been as wild and out there as what Abe Saffron's children would have received. Although they may have still been in the spotlight somewhat, they didn't get quite the attention. But sometimes you can't escape scandal and traumatic events. You see, Bruce's second wife, Patricia, was murdered. She wasn't murdered in Australia. She moved across to America. Patricia Galea wanted to get into the fashion market in Los Angeles, setting up her own boutique fashion store. It was the 70s and fashion was all the rage. The flares, the hairs. It was disco fever. And who wouldn't want to be in Los Angeles at the time? Sadly for Patricia though, these decisions would lead to the end of her life. There were very strange circumstances that surrounded this move to Los Angeles. She not only left her husband Bruce back in Australia, but she also left their 10-month-old daughter, Emily. I don't know about you, but I would never have left my daughter behind. Perhaps she wasn't allowed to take her. Perhaps the pull of a successful boutique business must have been too strong for Patricia. And having several friends in America, probably from doing modelling and such, she had people to stay with and knew people there. It just all seemed really strange. But it gets stranger, believe me. It all seemed to go wrong for Patricia when she needed more funds. Patricia made a quick stop back in Australia to pick up $6,400 in order to start the fashion business. She'd been working with Taylor Mercury Washington on her own clothing line, but needed the cash to get it off the ground. Once she had the funds, she was back on a plane to LA. Patricia was a very beautiful girl. She'd been doing modelling before and had a lot of friends, some who would stay with her, and she was renting with a rock musician named Eugene Senegal. Being a musician, he probably had a lot of friends too, and they must have had quite a few gatherings at the flat. They may have also gone and hit the town or various other places in America. For one particular night, the 14th of April in 1974, this would be Patricia's last night. The plan was to go with a bunch of friends to New Orleans. Mercury had set up a business meeting for them the next day, and the group decided to go there on an early morning flight. One of Patricia's friends, Christy Murphy, was looking after the flat, and Patricia's dog while Patricia and the friends were going to go to New Orleans. Patricia's friend Christine Murphy was 24 years of age, a couple of years younger than Patricia. She had a relationship that had gone south. The former boyfriend's name was Sonny. While Christine was house-sitting, she received a buzz at the intercom. Someone wanted to get in. When she called out to who it was, they said it was Sonny, her ex-boyfriend. Perhaps the voice through the intercom wasn't that clear. Either way, she let them in. But it wasn't Sonny who barged into the house. Now, the term they used for the three men who came into the house was Afro-American. Christine was tied up after they came inside, wielding knives and a gun. She was tied up and threatened not to scream while they ransacked Patricia and Eugene's home. It was pretty well known in their circle of friends that Patricia was quite wealthy, and word had obviously gotten out. They continued tearing up the place looking for money. They didn't find the stash that Patricia had in her freezer, but they did take mink coats, some jewellery, $400, as well as a cigarette case worth over $1,000. But for these robbers, things weren't going as planned. Because shortly after Christine is tied up and they're ransacking the house, Patricia and her friends, who'd missed their flight, came back to the apartment. They were buzzed in by Christine, probably at gunpoint, and when they came inside, they were ambushed by the masked men. The men had knives and a gun. They couldn't risk fighting back. The men tied them up also. The robbery was now bungled, and the men freaked out. They started attempting to kill them by cutting their throats. When Patricia begged for their lives, one of the men placed a .410 shotgun into Patricia's mouth and pulled the trigger. It would have been a horrific scene for all of her friends. This particular shotgun is used for game hunting, clay discs, or for birds. It is by no means a small weapon. After Patricia was shot, all hell broke loose. The men started trying to sever the throats of the rest of the friends. One of them, Camellia, managed to get to a window and jumped out. She received injuries from the fall, but not enough that she couldn't get away and raise the alarm. The murderers left as soon as they realised she'd left the room. This probably saved the life of the others. Now, in the aftermath, it is believed that Camellia said to Mercury, one of the others in the group, that she recognised one of the murderers as John Thrickeld, who she had known and had even spoken to not that long before the incident took place. Mercury also knew of this man, and it didn't take them long to work out who the other person was. But the third man, as they didn't speak the whole time, was unknown. For the next couple of months, they gave statements to police and accounts of what had taken place. They healed from their injuries, and poor Patricia's body was sent home to Australia. Bruce was there at the airport to meet the body. The newspapers said he was beside himself, devastated at the loss of his wife. They recorded him as saying, "The bludgers let go. They shot her. He couldn't believe it." And now Emily had no mother. It was such an awful tragedy. Decades later, Emily, now an adult, she wanted to know more about her mother, but Bruce never really spoke about what had happened. Perhaps he wasn't sure himself. Or was he involved somehow? An investigation took place early on about Bruce, and he was ruled out, possibly had an alibi, and he was in Australia. But he was a wealthy man. He had the money to organise a hit if he'd wanted to. And he moved on and remarried not long after the death. Emily now had a new mother, but she would never forget her biological mother. Now here's where things get even stranger. For the next 30 years, nothing is done about the killers. They had left the apartment in Christine Murphy's car, which was located dumped in Mexico. The two men that they knew of were tracked to Michigan and arrested in relation to a murder or robbery. From there, the LAPD requested extradition once they'd finished serving their trial or sentencing in jail. But this didn't happen. They were cleared of the murder-robbery and released. Even stranger, it is believed that the FBI were involved. John Threkheld was 21, and the other man, Leonard Turner, was 28. So why didn't police do something about it? Well, we know at this time that Australian police were pretty corrupt, and it seems pretty plausible that there could be just as many corrupt police in the Los Angeles area as well. And it is highly thought of that Threkheld had someone on the inside at the DA's office, possibly a female friend, who did him some favours and destroyed all of the evidence. They were not returned to Los Angeles. They were free to live their own lives. It's such a strange thing that nobody really followed it up for the next 30 years. It only came about when, in 2006, a man who had purchased the apartment where Eugene and Patricia lived wanted to know about its sinister past. He contacted the police department and was put in touch with a veteran, a Detective Brandenburg, working on cold cases, and had realised that these killers had not received a prison sentence for the murder, and it was now approximately 32 years. So they went ahead finding all the witnesses from back in 74. Many of them had died. Mercury Washington was still alive and re-gave his statement. They fought for a few years, but justice was not given. Despite having the statement from Mercury, they found that his statement was a little dottery after 3 decades. There was nobody else that could help corroborate his story. Everyone had passed on, or perhaps couldn't be located. There was no evidence. It had been lost 30 years before. Now, justice went to the murderers. They were allowed off because they weren't given a fair trial 30 years before. The judge ruling that the people failed in bringing them to justice all those years ago. And now, 30 years on, there's no hard evidence to have them put away for it. Although one of them did do time for the murder, it wasn't very long. Turner went to jail, but Threkheld was a free man. Where was Bruce through all of this? You would think that he would fight to have his wife's murderers put in jail, and the others who were involved, who were nearly murdered. What happened? Why was it just left? It doesn't make any sense. Did someone hush them all up? And if so, why didn't Mercury say this in the 2007 interviews? Either way, the situation was a very sad case. A woman's life was lost because of money. It just seems so stupid. And also that she didn't really get any justice for what they did to her. Bruce had a pretty well-off life for the rest of his days. A 1990 Royal Commission where everybody was throwing everybody else under the bus. Perce Galea was tight-lipped. He wouldn't say anything about anyone or incriminate himself, so he was held in contempt and ended up jailed in 1995, spending 2 years and 3 months in Long Bay Jail. It was a record sentence for that kind of thing. They were clearly making an example out of him. but he never said a word. He did his time and returned home to his family. Only passing a few years ago, his daughter Emily and other children were well taken care of. But if there's any sunshine through the clouds of this gloomy story, was that a miracle happened for Emily. She found out that she had a half-sister. Only after the murder of her mother was brought back into the headlines, she was fighting to get something done in 2010 about the men getting put into jail for the mother's murder. And she found that somebody else in America was fighting for the same thing. Emily had a sister, 13 years older than her. Patricia Galea had had a daughter from a previous relationship, Galea Pickles. She knew of Bruce and was introduced to Bruce. She also accompanied them on several outings, right up until her mother's death. She ended up being brought up by Patricia's parents, as Patricia was only 15 when she had her. Back in those days, it was forbidden for a teenage mother to raise a child, so the parents took Galea and brought her up as their own. But Galea did know that Patricia was her mother and had some special moments with her before she moved to LA. So not only did Patricia leave behind a 10-month-old daughter, Emily, but she also left behind her 13-year-old daughter, Galea, to pursue her dreams of a fashion business a world away from them. A few years after the devastation of losing her mother, Galea moved to Los Angeles herself, as it was a way to be closer to the mother that she'd lost. Emily was being raised by her father Bruce and a new mother. Galea had a family of her own in Los Angeles, not far from where her mother was murdered. And it took 3 decades, but Galea and sister Emily were reunited. Perhaps Bruce had nothing to do with the murder, and he was devastated by his loss and had to move on. He was raised by Perce, a mild-mannered Catholic man, generous. Although he dabbled in the illegal side of things, he was still known as a good man. It makes you think, could a man raised by someone like Perce Galea put a hit out on his own wife? It seems a little rough. They could have just got divorced. He could have paid her off and said that they were unhappy. But no, he encouraged her, it seems, to follow her dreams. And then, in the aftermath, has to raise her daughter alone. Maybe it was too much. Emily needed a mother, and he remarried, having another child, a son, not long after. Perhaps it was too painful to reach out to Galea at the time, and she'd been looked after by Patricia's parents. Why didn't they fight further? Well, perhaps they were upset with Patricia deep down. She ran off halfway across the world to pursue her dreams and left her children behind. Whichever way you look at it, it was a terrible thing that happened, a terrible loss of life, and the mourning for the rest of her family went on. Justice was not completed for Patricia's murder, and it seems those who were left behind suffered the most. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. We've got plenty more criminals, cutthroats and convicts to come, so definitely stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you enjoyed the episode, hit the like button and hit that notification bell. Well, you know why. Till next time.